It's Thursday, it's 4:20. That means it's time to start the conversation. THC Live starts now. Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of THC Live. I am Shane Foxman. You'll notice again I'm flying solo this week. Nikita will return next week. We'll find out what she's been up to, what sort of research she's been conducting. We'll find out what the results are. We have another jam-packed show for you. Once again tonight, author Stephen Gray is going to join us live in studio. You're going to love the title of his book, Cannabis and Spirituality, An Explorer's Guide to an Ancient Plant Spirit Ally. We had a chance to talk to Stephen just before we came to air. I think you're going to enjoy the conversation. We'll get into the long history of the use of cannabis in a spiritual form and maybe some of the different ways it is used. Also joining us live in studio, Brian Thomas. He's a community outreach therapist with Fraser Health, specializing with dealing with addiction. Has spent the last 15 years on the front lines. And if you think you know what his thoughts are on the legalization of marijuana, you might want to think again. He'll join us a little bit later in the show. During our news segment, we'll also hear from Canada's Minister of Health, the federal government, releasing its guidelines as we get closer and closer to July 1st. And I think some of the things that the government had to say might have caught people by surprise, and a lot of it has been received rather positively. So we'll get into that as well. Now, for the first 10 weeks on this show, we've been running a history segment called Growing Pains. And if you've been watching, and I should tell you this first off, if you're watching on Facebook, of course, I understand just below the screen there's a box if you have a question or a comment you want, a share or a question for one of our guests on the show, type it in there and we'll get to as many as we can during the show. You can also catch up past episodes of the show and different segments on YouTube at THC Live Space TV. And that's if you want to see some of those older episodes of Growing Pains, which is kind of what reminded me about that. So over time, the last 10 weeks, we've showed you the history in the fight against, marijuana, the prohibition, and what's led to it and what's kept it illegal up until now. One of the things we've noticed is time and time again, the government has commissioned reports, scientific reports, and when it comes back and they don't like the results, they bury it. And the campaign of misinformation continues. And one of the ways the government led that campaign of misinformation was in, we'd call them now as PSAs, public service announcements. Except as you look back at some of them now, they were nothing but propaganda. Take a look at this classic we found.
The next step is the garage. There, some of the gang are really blasting. That's where the real action is. Come on and take a look. Take a trip from Squaresville. Live a little and see what it's like for yourself. The senses are dulled just enough to be reckless. Helen, the music, the beer, the promise of excitement press in on him. Now, curiosity has to be satisfied. And why not? It can't do any harm to look. This is the real action, the pot party. The trippers, the grasshoppers, the hip ones, all gathered in secrecy and flying high as a kite. Outside the boundaries of their phony world of kicks is the ever-present possibility of discovery. This must be avoided at all costs, for discovery brings with it the penalties of society: shame, arrest, prison. So destroy the evidence, leave not a trace, burn it in paper trash. That way they can deny possessing the illegal marijuana. They can say the flaming can is part of a game. They can lie, they can swear. This time the gang's lucky. It's not the law, or discovery, or problems. It's just their supplier, Pete, with his #1 chick, and a new guy looking for kicks. Forget it, man, and get with the countdown. Shake this square world and blast off for Kicksville.
Blast off for Kicksville. It's hard to look at those with a straight face and realize when they were put out, Dead serious. That was the message they were getting across. And look at those people in the garage. They looked, what, like ruffians? They just looked like your average Joes. Crazy. As you saw in the wide shot, as we promised you off the top, author Stephen Gray joining us in studio. Thanks so much for coming in, Stephen. We appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to be here.
The book, Cannabis and Spirituality, an explorer's guide to an ancient plant spirit ally. Before we get into cannabis and its relationship with spirituality, how did you find yourself even interested in this?
Well, I'm from that demographic that has been called like the hippies or the countercultural, era, whatever, Nobody ever called ourselves hippies back then. That was what the so-called straights called us in those days. So cannabis kind of came on, into the culture fairly quickly, and I was interested in it. I didn't really think of it as a spiritual medicine, particularly at the time. I just liked it for a while there, But it was part and parcel of a package of things that were happening at that time, which was a burst of interest in spirituality, and Eastern or Asian spirituality in particular, and the psychedelics. So I got interested in all of that, including the spiritual side of it. And then, it would take me way too long for the purposes of our show here to say what happened after that. But I left it for a while and got involved with Tibetan Buddhist practice for a number of years.
I was going to say, were you a spiritual person to begin with?
Well, there was a huge interest in among the countercultural people at that time in the psychedelics. And the psychedelics are kind of almost a priori spiritual substances, although a lot of people didn't necessarily think of it that way, just as a lot of young people now probably just think of taking some psilocybin mushrooms as a kind of a thrill ride, right? It's still, that mentality still exists, and it did then too. But then there was this whole spiritual side of it, and I was always interested in that. Right from the first I started to hear about it, I was reading, books on Hinduism and Buddhism and Zen Buddhism and that sort of thing, And for me, the psychedelics and the Buddhism sort of dovetailed, but the Buddhists themselves weren't using them.
Right.
So I kind of left that all behind. And actually, for me, cannabis use as a spiritual substance came after my reintroduction or re-entry into using psychedelics spiritually, which didn't occur until the late 80s or so, when I started to see that there was information around saying that people had been using these substances for thousands of years, not casually the way we have done in our culture for the most part, but in ritual and shamanic healing, ceremony and stuff. Indigenous people in various parts of the planet had been using these. So I got reinterested in combining the spiritual understanding that I'd been gaining from working with Tibetan Buddhism with the potential for amplifying all that and channeling a powerful energy with the psychedelics. And that eventually connected me to the idea that, well, wait a minute, cannabis is one of those. It's not always considered that way, but it has an ancient history of that kind of use, and it's not getting enough attention. So I was having a conversation with one of the people who came to our conference that I was organizing, Kathleen Harrison, who's a world-renowned, in her world anyway, ethnobotanist, and a wonderful, wise person. And I said, well, I think this needs addressing, but I don't think I have a whole book in it myself. And she said, if you put that book together, I'd contribute to it. And that got me going. That was 5 years ago, and it resulted in the book with 18 contributors counting me. Yeah.
Did you, and there's a look at for the folks that are watching at home.
Oh,
did you, did it matter as you did more research into it, regardless of the religion or maybe the geographical place on the planet, that cannabis tended to leak into it in different places at different times, different backgrounds? It was wide ranging as opposed to it was just in one spot on the planet.
Yeah, well, I like to use the term the people's plant. One of the contributors to the book calls it the people's psychedelic, because it's always belonged to the people. It's always been part of folk culture and community, for medical use, for practical uses, for building materials, and for spiritual use. I mean, you couldn't help but discover that, before we had Safeways.
Right.
You had to know every single plant in your neighborhood, right?
Right.
And what it was for. And it would have been essentially impossible not to discover that if you smoked it, threw it on your fireplace, even tossed the leaves on the fireplace or something and got some secondhand smoke, there was going to be a bit of an alteration of consciousness. So,
and is that what they were in spirituality? Was it the altering the consciousness, or was that just part of it? There's many different, because I would think that would be part of it.
Sorry, what exactly?
Like the altering the consciousness would be one of the ways it's used spiritually.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm sure there's many different uses, but I would think that would be one to kind of open one's
I would say
mind.
that's the central understanding of using cannabis as a spiritual medicine.
Right.
I mean, the you know, I don't know how much rambling I can do in the time that we have.
Well,
here.
let's see.
Okay, well, stop me then.
Sure.
When you're ready. I want to just give like a super condensed little primer on the nature of spiritual awakening. This is kind of from a Buddhist perspective. Pretty much everybody is walking around encased in what Buddhists would call ego, which is the way that we build our lives to survive based on a whole collection or you know, kit bag of ideas that we've formed in our heads, concepts and beliefs, right, that we've taken on from the culture and we build up ourselves. It's not real. It's just it's just a story, and that Buddhists would say that's an illusion, that we've created this fictional character to protect ourselves, essentially, and that the spiritual path has to do with gradually releasing or letting go of all those kind of stories that create filters and protection, layers of protection, and relaxing into the present moment, that we can trust that there's an intelligence in that there's a potential to open our hearts and find a peace in the present moment, you know. A lot of people are talking about it. Camille and I were talking a few moments ago about Eckhart Tolle and how he talks a lot about nowness, right? Entering and trusting into that moment. And where cannabis then comes in, potentially, and I do think of it as others do as an advanced spiritual medicine, not something you're necessarily going to understand and be able to work with effectively right away. But you could think of it, and I think it's very useful to think of it as a non-specific amplifier, as other psychedelics also are. And in other words, you're temporarily given a gift of amplified psychic energy, mind-body energy, you might say. And then the key issue is what your intention is with that. What do you do with that? It's like you're given this tool, you're given this energy. What do you do with it? Well, if your intention, either consciously or unconsciously, is to escape, she'll help you go that way too, because she's amplifying that. She can exaggerate any kind of experience, essentially, right? If your intention is to wake up, to heal, to be present, the amplification effect can be channeled in that direction. And then it becomes a matter of, well, how do you actually do that? So Terence McKenna, the late great psychedelic philosopher, had a sort of crude admonition, which was, sit down, shut up, and pay attention, you know? Like, just be there for it, surrender to it, open up to it. Don't fill your space with all kinds of distractions, you know, don't crack a beer necessarily, or grab a pizza or turn on the TV. Sit and meditate with it. I think when you asked about the historical use, that's kind of what they did. They chanted, they did yoga, they sat in silent meditation. They allowed the plant to be there. And when you can do that, it potentially has this remarkable ability to you know, amplify us deeply, more deeply into the present.
When you talk about that it has been around so long and its roots go back, it seems that, was there a point in time where regardless, it was only a minority that still followed suit with that? Because it doesn't seem like it's used as much, maybe, or we're aware, I should probably say, that it's being used as much. And we might see a turn now, in our day and age.
Well, that's what the book's for, hoping there will be a turn.
Well, okay, well, it could be the right time.
I think one of the original subtitles I was toying with was, you know, the reclaiming and re-honoring of an ancient spiritual ally, right?
Right.
Well, you know, that's actually a complicated question and way more detailed than we could talk about. But there is an element of it as what you might call the left-hand path, or the sort of the outsider path, right? That, you know, the short version is that institutional religions and secular authorities tend to want to control people, right? Yes. So they don't actually want you to have your own spiritual experience. I mean, there's this whole really fascinating thing that happened in the early years of Christianity, which was essentially a battle between the Gnostics, who were the people who were more interested in actual direct experience, and what they called the Orthodox, who were the people who were putting together the hierarchy of the church, and who claimed that the only way you could ever have a quote spiritual experience was through the mediation of the priest and the hierarchy, right? They wanted control over our minds, you know, our cognitive liberty. But cannabis has been outlawed and vilified occasionally here and there for that reason, because you can't control people when people are having their own experiences, and that goes for all the other psychedelics as well.
The campaign of misinformation.
Absolutely.
Whether it was the church or whether it was the government. It seems that this plant, for some reason, and I'll see if Camille has any questions for us, but it just seems that this plant, for whatever reason, is the victim of misinformation at many different levels and from many different places. Can you understand? Is that because of the free thinking, free will?
It is. It's absolutely, it's an issue of cognitive liberty. That my view and the view of many people is that it's nobody else's business what I do with my mind unless I'm harming other people. That's not anybody's business. No authority has the right to tell me what I can do with my mind, right? But people have a lot to gain from controlling other people and scaring them as well.
Yeah, fear always.
Yeah,
that seems to be the biggest. That fear always sells.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to have a couple of questions coming in. Thank you very much, Camille. Oh wait, Carmen. I'm sorry. I keep calling you. No, that's okay. I keep calling you Camille for no apparent reason. My apologies. Okay, here I got a question for you from our friends in Alberta. This is Jean. Please define what a spiritual awakening is.
Yeah, well, I think I already made an attempt at that. That
give me a
there is such thing
terms,
as what you might call unconditional reality or unconditioned reality that is not filtered through our beliefs and concepts. And as Buddhist teachings would say, that is our true nature, and it's accessible to every human being. It's not a theory. It's not a set of dogmatic or fixed beliefs. It's who we really are. And what 99.99% of human beings are engaged in is an active process of resisting, protecting, denying, ignoring that, right? And that's another reason why the authorities, it's complicated, but you might call it projection. People who are afraid of life on some level, who are afraid of their own natural state, their own awakening, don't want anyone else to experience it because that's a threat. That person becomes a mirror to you. So that functions as well, right?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
So spiritual awakening, as I understand it, is a natural reality that's the reality that has nothing to do with, doesn't belong to any religion or point of view or anything. It's just who we are when all the other stuff falls away and what we have to do to get there, so to speak. Come back to ourselves, really.
One last question. This is from Thunder Bay, and you might be able to answer this, you might not, just from your experience. Have you found any strain or specific dose would you recommend, and I don't want to use the term recommend, maybe suggest, for someone who's looking to explore their spirituality? Who's looking to explore spirituality?
Absolutely, yeah. It's a big topic. I address in one. I have 4 or 5 chapters in the book, and I have a section on dosage and on strains. They're both important, especially dosage. Here's the simple way of putting it. This is only one way to look at it, but the optimal dosage is the dosage that you both want to and can handle. This is a big, the big topic to try to understand. When I say can handle, cannabis is actually a reality medicine. It's not a drug. When you treat it reverently and respectfully as a spiritual medicine, it's not a drug. It's a reality medicine. It expands things, right? That amplification thing that I was talking about. Yeah. So. It threatens the ego because the ego doesn't want anything to change, right? So the stronger the dosage, the bigger the threat. Hence the potential for fear, paranoia, which comes up.
Right.
Paranoia is essentially just an elaborate construction of fear, and it's because your cocoon has been threatened. Cannabis ups the ante and potentially threatens the status quo that way. So there's a key phrase that several of us use in the book, which is less is more. Start small, especially if you're not used to it. And when I say can handle, it's like, what is the dosage, maximum dosage at which you can stay present, you can sit down and meditate and not be completely caught up in thought all the time, not become dizzy or nauseous or scared or whatever. If you've experienced any of those symptoms, you've either overdosed or you haven't learned how to channel the energy, right? So it's really important. And as a lot of people know now, Well, first of all, the THC content in a lot of this stuff is extreme,
Right.
and it becomes potentially dangerous for people where even one toke, if you're a sensitive person, that's another issue too that we could talk about if there's time. I don't know what your time factor is, but the adolescent brain and young people.
Oh no, yes,
it's an
for sure.
important issue.
Oh no, it's,
yeah. I don't know. You've talked about it on
yes,
other shows.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So inhalation, especially with these high THC medicines now, can be very, very powerful and cause people to freak out. My doctor hates cannabis, my family doctor, because the only way he ever encounters is that people come into his office having a panic attack, right?
Right.
That's overdosing. That's not knowing how to channel the energy.
Well,
right?
Start small.
Yeah, start small.
Start small is the only. It makes sense, but no matter what it would be, that seems to be the best
and
advice.
I was going to say that even with, or especially with orally ingested cannabis, because the ceiling is far higher, the duration is much greater. You're a journalist, or more or less.
Yes.
You know who Maureen Dowd is?
Yes.
Op-ed
Right.
from the New York Times. She went to Colorado. She bought a cookie or something. Apparently they warned her not to eat the whole thing. She went back to her hotel room and ate the whole thing. And she said, I thought I had died and nobody was telling me. That's actually spiritual medicine. Like, that's ego death. That's what awakening is ego death in a sense. But if you don't know how to approach that, that's why I call it we call it an advanced spiritual medicine. It's not something to trifle with in that way.
It's too bad she didn't realize. Stephen, thank you so much
for a
for
good
coming in.
article.
Exactly. I appreciate your time. Tremendous. Stephen Gray, author of the book Cannabis and Spirituality, an Explorer's Guide to an Ancient Plant Spirit Ally. Thank you very much again for coming in. Lots more still to come on this episode of THC Live. First, though, let's check out this week's book club. This week, I'll tell you what, I told the folks behind the scenes here at THC Live, the author of that book would be a fantastic guest. So we'll effort that in the coming weeks and see how things play out. I'm not even sure if anyone actually listens to me in those meetings, but that'll be a good test for us. We'll see if anyone shows up. Time to turn our attention to what's making news this week. And here in the last 10 days, this is the beauty of what used to drive me crazy about working in the media. So first, there's the headline, Baby Boy is First Marijuana Overdose Death, according to doctors. That was the headline. And remember, we had Dr. Rob O'Brien on last week, and I remember vividly him saying, well, no one's ever died from marijuana, and of course, as soon as he leaves, that's the headline. So you go, holy cow, what's going on? Apparently, the child, it was an 11-month-old child, died in 2015, was rushed to the emergency room after having a seizure. The boy's guardian told doctors that the child had been retching, was irritable and lethargic in the days leading up to his hospitalization. A team of doctors examined the boy for medical conditions. They found him to be fine. But after he became unresponsive and had passed away, they found that his urine contained THC. So right away, first marijuana death, it's all over the place. Within days, another article comes out quoting the same doctors, and they say, we're absolutely, and this is a quote from the doctors, we're absolutely not saying that marijuana killed that child. That was according to one of the doctors. They go on to say, we're not saying definitively that marijuana caused the condition. It was the heart muscle. The exact term is myocarditis, I think, is the phrase, but it's, I guess, the swelling of the heart muscle. And he's saying, I can't say for sure that marijuana caused it, but we didn't find anything else in the baby's system. So they have to have more tests. He says nothing is definitive. But it's amazing from one headline to the next. But the bottom line is, no matter what, whether it's legal or not legal, I think it's safe to say anyone who's using marijuana, decides to use marijuana, cannabis, you have to keep, it's almost like the rules for guns and bullets south of the border or even here, where you have to, keep your gun secured and your ammunition secured separately. The same thing, if you have marijuana in your house and you have kids in your house, use your head. make sure you keep it out of reach. It's not like the medicine cabinet, further out of reach than that. But that really isn't something that we should be telling you. You should know that already. We talked about this off the top of the show, the federal government announcing some of the guidelines as we get closer and closer to July 1st and legalization. The health minister making a number of comments on the upcoming regulations, including, and this has been fascinating, there was so much talk about who are going to be the licensed growers, who are going to be the ones, forget the dispensary and who is going to be the retail outlets. Let's go back even further. Who's going to be allowed to grow it? Who is going to be allowed to sell it and supply the dispensaries? Well, I think this is pretty good news for folks across the country. Here's the health minister.
Well, we've heard from Canadians, I guess, that they wanted to ensure that if they wanted to enter the market, they were scared that only big corporations or medium-sized businesses could enter the market. So we really want to make sure that we can allow Canadians, if they so choose, to make application for a license to produce. It doesn't matter what size it's going to be of the industry. If they choose that they want to make the application through Health Canada, they absolutely can. But what is clear is that we want to make sure that Canadians recognize that we are not going to be limiting access to licenses. If people choose to apply for a license, Health Canada will be going through the appropriate screening process, and then from there we'll make the assessment to see if they're eligible to provide the service.
You know what? We're going to see growers kind of like craft breweries, smaller operations, boutique operations. And I think one of the things that you heard from the minister, no limit on the number of permits the government will issue. That opens the door for all kinds of possibilities. Also, the government will open the door to increasing the number of and types of products available. So whether it's pre-rolled joints, whether it's oils, whether it's pills, whether it's creams, they are really kind of leaving it wide open for a variety of different uses. A lot of concerns, of course, have been talking about, the packaging and how will we have those kind of labels. It's going to say the ingredients like we have on the foods and the kind of pictures they have on cigarettes and tobacco. The minister also went on to discuss packaging.
What we're looking at is very much a strict regulatory process when it comes to packaging. Someone asked me today, so you're not with respect to plain packaging. I guess my answer to that is that plain packaging doesn't mean putting it in a brown paper bag. We want to make sure that Canadians, or when producers are going to be able to put their product in a package, that they'll be allowed to provide information on the package, like what is the THC content in the product that you're purchasing, because we feel it's very important for Canadians to know what they're consuming so they can make an informed decision on the product that they're purchasing. We are also indicating that we want it to be clear, it's a proposal or a recommendation, that health warnings will also be put on the package as well. We're considering allowing them to have a logo, but the logo again has to be very specific to the criteria. So again, with respect to characters, cartoon characters, all of that stuff would not be approved. And also even with respect to the color of the packaging is things that, again, we're putting strict,
what considering. Type of coloring? Just like black and white? Or?
And again, no decision has really been made with respect to that. We're still in the consultation process, but we really want to make sure that it's not something that's flashy that kids are going to be attracted to, for example.
That's the federal health minister, and I appreciate what they're saying on the cartoon characters. You remember the big fight, was it the Camel for Joe Cool for cigarettes south of the border, and they got rid of him. I get it. I don't know if they have to really be concerned that much about the packaging, the colors. It can be black and white. That's not why this product is going to sell. It's not one of those things that is brand new and you see it on the shelf and you're trying to grab the consumer's attention. People know what they're buying. I don't think it can be black and white. It could be, as she said, you don't want to have a brown paper bag. It could be a brown paper bag. That is not going to be the determining factor. But as we said, some very interesting news coming from the federal government. Canadians have until January 20th to offer their opinions, either through an online questionnaire or providing a written submission, things that they would like to see or things that they are concerned about as we get closer to legalization. A lot of talk about what's been going on in Colorado. We heard from the medical officer of health there, was talking about how there was no concerns whatsoever, nothing that people were worried about happened. A bit of a different story coming out this week. It was the 5th anniversary of Colorado's decision to, of course, legalize recreational marijuana. And there's been some interesting findings. Some of them, though, I think you have to take with a grain of salt. Let's see, it says 5 years. It says there's been 5 years of marijuana in Colorado State has ushered in a doubling a doubling in the number of drivers involved in fatal crashes who tested positive for marijuana. That was based on an article in the Denver Post. Now, the problem is it doesn't really say doubling the number of drivers who tested positive for marijuana. It doesn't say that marijuana was the reason that there was a car crash. We all know, then we've talked to different folks about, having roadside tests and how long marijuana stays in your system. So just because a driver involved in a crash tested positive for marijuana doesn't mean that they were high when they were driving. And they also don't say doubling the number. What was the number? If it was 1, so it's doubled to 2. It's hard to really say when they don't supply really all the information. Also talked about homelessness. And it says in the 5 years of homelessness growth rate ranks among the highest in the country, that in Colorado. Directors of homeless shelters and people who live on the streets tell us homeless substance abusers migrate there for easy access to pot. So while there are more homeless people in Colorado, it's not there's more people, Colorado residents who are homeless. It seems that homeless folks from other parts of the country are kind of converging on Colorado for the reason that pot is legal. So again, if you've taken stats at university, or in any sort of course, you realize you can make numbers say anything you want. So just someone else raising another opinion about what's going on in Colorado. Finally, we talked about hemp and the different products. We had the hemp manufacturers on a number of weeks ago just talking about their gearing up for all kinds of possibilities. I don't know if you knew this, though. Dog leashes, dog toys, all kinds of stuff for the pets is getting a lot of attention. Natural pet products, collars, leashes, toys, apparel, bedding, and more. Studies have shown that under normal conditions, hemp outlasts materials such as cotton, denim, and polyester by many years. So again, you learn something new every day when it comes to the world of hemp. As mentioned off the top of the show, our next guest joining us live in studio, Brian Thomas, a community outreach therapist, specializes in addiction. You've spent years working on the front lines. Let me ask you this, and I think this might surprise folks. As we get closer to legalization, are you worried there'll be more problems? Are you worried there'll be more folks you have to deal with? You'll have more clients? Or is it, I don't want to say much ado about nothing, I don't want to downplay it, but what's your concerns, if any, as we get closer?
Well, I'm actually more interested in controlling and getting rid of the prohibition on cannabis because it can actually be harder for youth clients that I've worked with to access alcohol or cigarettes than it is to go score pot from the guy next door. So when they say things like, they're worried about the kids or easier access for kids, it's kind of, I don't know where they're getting their information from really, but working on the front lines and working with youth, working with homeless, working with educators, law enforcement, everyone that I've talked to and trained, no one's sitting there going, oh my God, cannabis is going to be legal. No one's really freaking out about it from what I've seen.
I was going to say 35 years ago, 40 years ago when I'm in school, it was easy to get, and it hasn't gotten harder in the 40 years since.
No.
So that's why, sometimes even when I hear the minister talking about packaging and attracting kids, this isn't something brand new. This is something that's existed already. We're just trying to kind of get a handle on things.
Well, as like anything in government, it takes forever to get sorted out and straightened out and who's going to make the money and how's this going to benefit society. And what I've seen and what I always promote is that we have to drop the stigmatism of what an addict is or the whole stereotype of what someone's doing that's killing themselves with drugs or can't function without narcotic or cannabis or whatever it is. Because when you make something illegal, we all know that makes a lot of black market people rich. And there's no control, everything's adulterated. And that's more at risk for my clients when they're going to score a flap off the street and they're addicted to crystal meth. They don't know exactly what they're getting. We've had clients come into the clinic lately that are buying street level narcotics, and they're thinking that they're going to get an opiate. So they say, oh, I'm just doing heroin, and everyone's testing positive for fentanyl, ecstasy, and benzos. So it's a cocktail. It's a freaking cocktail.
You don't know what you're getting.
Oh, not a chance. Not a chance.
You know, we talked about this before the show. So many times you hear from folks over the years, gateway drug. You're going to smoke a joint, the next thing you know, you have a needle in your arm. It goes hand in hand.
Big time.
And it's been proven time and time again. You see scientific reports go, no, that's not the case. But now I've spoken to folks that deal with the opioid crisis and fentanyl, and they go, no, you know what? We can use marijuana as an exit drug.
Yeah.
Can
Well,
you
why not? I mean,
yeah.
you could use the Easter Bunny for an exit drug.
Right.
As long as someone's going to buy in, like it, and want to get invested. Just like what he was talking about before me with the meditation, and that's a beautiful way to heal someone therapeutically. They got to buy in. So if we can reduce the harm physically to themselves and society, we have to mature as a society. This is ridiculous. Ridiculous. Talking to the black and white and the old school versus law enforcement, and a lot of police officers are like, weed, whatever, because they just obviously aren't gonna. The only reason they enforce the law is because it's written in law. Other than that, it's it's. Sorry, I'm totally nervous. I thought it was supposed to be like a radio show, dude.
Yeah. No worries, buddy. Pretend there's nobody here.
These lights are annoying.
Let me ask you again. In the years when you're dealing with kids, and not even kids, but folks that are dealing with addiction, is marijuana ever the issue? It's always something else, is it not?
Well, it's like, okay, if you smoke an ounce a day and you can't stop, yes, it becomes a problem because you become, little Billy's not motivated anymore. It's like that commercial, the kid, marijuana's never caused any harm to me, and he's still on the video, playing video games on the couch.
You're looking for a job today, Jimmy? No, Mom.
No.
Yeah.
That was stay home.
Right.
I mean, that was great. But no, with that whole gateway drug, I mean, even in my early education years, I had to do some intervention in the schools, and it was literally in Health Canada's brochure. It's still that same, isn't it Nixon that came up with that shit?
Yeah, it's all misinformation, yeah.
Like, really? And so it's been a very powerful tool, actually, in therapy when, I go see little Billy and he's smoking way too much pot. He quit lacrosse. He's not doing things for himself. He's cutting school. Because, he's getting totally lethargic and he's probably smoking so much indica that he's couch locked.
Right.
So, of course, little Billy's not going far. But when I tell little Billy, dude, you're abusing your medications, he looks at me different. He's like, oh, well, cannabis helps me. I'm like, well, how does cannabis help? It's just like how does methadone help?
Right.
We're reducing the harm by educating these people. So with youth, it's always been a really good catalyst as far as you're over-abusing your medication. You're over-abusing your scripts, right? And like I said to you
everything
before,
in moderation, yeah.
Moderation, but I mean, it's the same thing as if you got back pain today and you get Percocet, you're gonna take 8 pills or what's prescribed? Like even in like the 12-step literature, it says, we don't have an opinion on medication, but yet if you take it as prescribed, you don't change your clean date. So it's responsible use. Even AA talks about responsible use. So that's pretty much the gist of it when it comes to medications. And people say in therapy, like, pot helps me. I say, well, show me. Show me how pot helps you.
Right.
If it's just another thing to stick in your body and get wasted on, then and you're not moving forward in your life, there's no spiritual development, your relationships are still shitty, whatever's going on. But what changed my mind about cannabis early on was, well, for one, the gateway drug is really alcohol, by far. I'll just say it like I see it.
Yeah.
I mean, alcohol is one of the number causes for all of our hospital visits. Like it's 50% apparently now, alcohol related. The people that I see that abuse alcohol get Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, where they get the wet brain, early dementia. They're the toughest clients to ever work with. One of the successful candidates we had with cannabis substitution was a chronic drinker, edibles. He just, and I think he got so couch locked he couldn't walk to the liquor store.
Right.
Inadvertently
A
little bit of greenies, just some greenies, but he was all right once he figured out his titration of dose, and it was actually pretty useful. And there's even people that are still using they call it cannabis substitution. What is that? What they call it? Anyways. But what really changed my mind about it was I worked with this one youth who had the worst ADD you've ever seen. So he'd come for session, he'd be like this, hey, what's up? And he'd have to stand up and walk around. I could get 2 sentences out of him at all. And it was, he had heavy trauma, abuse, all sorts of heinous things that I've witnessed in my line of work. And so it was actually 4:20. I was up in the office. Him and a couple of his other buddies, other clients of mine, come into my office, gaggling along and, happy as clams. And I'm like, and I looked at him, you're baked. But he sat down and he just sat like this. Hey, Brian. And we talked for 45 minutes straight. And now he was given Ritalin, he was given Adderall, and a lot of these like pharmaceutical stimulants. But when he smoked a sativa, he was calm as a cow. He was just, And we had the best, we actually had therapeutic growth. So when I talk like that to some of my colleagues, like, it's still polarized in the industry.
I was going to
right?
ask you,
For sure.
like, if I had a group of folks in your line of work, all together here, how many would go, oh yeah, no, Brian's speaking the gospel, I agree with what he's saying, and how many would go, no man, you're totally out to lunch, you're missing the boat?
Well, that's changed over time.
Yeah.
Because one, I'm old and I've been around for a while.
Right.
And they can't shut me up. The other part is the proof is in the person at the end of the day. So when you look at the case, like I do a case presentation for a client, it's like he did this, and yes, you know what? That's the most commonest I've ever seen this client was after he'd smoked cannabis. And then I started thinking, okay, well, it's not toxic, right? And I think about like, I have to plug the Joe Rogan joke.
Yeah.
My favorite one is the only way someone would actually die from cannabis is if a ton of it fell out of a plane and crushed them.
Right.
Because I think it's 14 pounds of consumption in 14 minutes or something.
Again, no
I think
one's
if you
ever
ate,
died.
I think if you ate 14 pounds of carrots in 14 minutes, you'd probably die too.
Right.
But anyways, yeah. So in harm reduction, the model is basically, and like I said, I am more with working with people. It's more about where they're at in their lives, right? So if you had, like with the harm reduction and the methadone and all that sort of stuff that came out, a lot of people, it's very polarized. So if you lined up 14 of my colleagues, some would be like, oh, cannabis is just a drug, whatever, right? And then some would say, well, don't use cannabis, but here, take Suboxone if you're gonna come off an opiate, right? So it's like 31 flavors.
Right.
Because we were talking about earlier about my industry where it's really weird. Like we got L. Ron Hubbard Scientologists have a treatment center and they've got the cure. Then we got this other model and another model and another model and all across the board. And so who's really right?
But I would say that they're all right because, again, everyone would need something different. Everyone who's got an issue needs something different to help them get over whatever it is, the hump, to get past it. So
sure, yeah.
The more choices, the better, I would think.
Well, and if something substitutes buying the adulterated crap on the street or gets a woman who's prostituting herself, like working with a teenage female prostitute is an eye-opener. Oh. And if you say, hey, you want to come to this abstinence-based model right now? A lot of times they're like, no way, they can't vision their lives. They've got trauma, they're addicted to the opiate. Kicking an opiate is the most brutal pain for people, right? So if I said, hey, try this pharmaceutical medication that's properly dispensed and properly monitored, just like cannabis is going to be, right? With the doses of THC, and they go, okay, I'll try that. So, as a parent, if that was my kid, yes, whatever works, stop soliciting and having to sleep with old men.
Right.
Or whatever, right?
Yeah, whatever.
So, and the thing about addictions and mental health, it doesn't really strike a nerve until it hits home.
Right.
Joe Taxpayer, Joe Public was like, oh, these homeless people, blah, blah, blah. And I get it, but really the homeless population is really small. And the biggest cost is because of the prohibition and law enforcement. These huge costs.
I think of how much has been spent on that. It's mind-boggling.
Well, think of Harper. He wanted to take us right into prisons for profit. Yay!
Yeah, well,
it didn't work 20 years ago in the States,
we wouldn't be
bro.
where we are now.
But I'd get more clients because they'd mandate clients to me, and that's always good.
Yeah. Carmen, I think, is going to have a couple of questions for us. Thanks. Oh, Camille. See, and I keep fixing it. Oh, see, and I was apologizing for calling you Camille because I thought it was Carmen. You know what? Thank you. Greg in Port Hardy has a question for you.
Port Hardy, what's up?
Exactly. What's up, Port Hardy? Isn't switching addicts from opiates to cannabis just dragging out their recovery?
Well, sure. But if it actually reduces the harm, okay.
Maybe
so
if you start the process.
I guess I'd have to ask: are you talking about switching them from like street heroin to cannabis? Or are you talking about methadone to cannabis? Or are you talking about?
Right.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's quality of life for the client, right? Mm-hmm. So if they're actually moving forward and they say, yeah, I smoke pot at the end of my day, but they're working, they're happy. And really that's what it's about, right? Our quality of life. We don't have the word substance addiction in the Gov anymore. We use substance use. We're trying to take the stigma of addict and da-da-da-da-da, or like mental health.
Right, oh, that's interesting.
But no, it's a good question because, I understand that it's a really big one because there's a lot of people I talk to that, and it's like the rants that I've seen on, and other comments I've seen on public, social media, where it's just replacing one drug for another drug.
Right.
Right? And that's Yes, you are. But are you? Is
But
there
if
a
one's
lifestyle?
less harmful than the other, wouldn't that still be a good thing?
Hey man,
I
I've
would
had clients.
think.
No, but it's the same thing. I've had clients that have come off of the methadone. Cannabis helps them through that as long as they come off properly.
Right.
But does their quality of life improve? And that's how we base success in therapy.
I would think so.
I don't care if you have to huff Pam every day, dude. But you know what? If your life gets better every day, you go, Billy.
Right.
Right. Right.
Brian, thanks so much for your time, man.
Oh, you're
I appreciate
welcome.
it tremendously. You have one of those jobs, and I say this about your line of work and nurses. Whenever I walk out of the hospital that I've got, you're in there for something or a family member, I walk out, I go, I don't know how those people do that every day, because you're dealing with people that are in their worst possible shape, and you would be, to the same degree, a little different, maybe even worse. They're not getting the help. At least in the hospital, you're getting help at that point.
Right.
You're dealing with people at their worst. It's got to be, before I let you go, what does keep you going back every day?
What keeps me going back every day is my passion to serve my community and society. And it's also, when I meet a client who's in a psych ward at age 16 for crystal methachosis, and now he's a psych nurse and a triathlete, and he's 30.
Right.
Owns his place, has his car, and he smokes pot.
Right.
Let's condemn that guy. But anyways,
Brian
who am I to
Thomas.
judge quality of life, right?
I hear you.
We all get to
Community
know it.
outreach therapist, thanks so much for joining us. Coming up on next week's show, just give you a heads up, Aaron Bedard, a veteran of the war in Afghanistan, suffers from PTSD. He uses cannabis to treat his anxiety. He also advocates for veterans' rights. Aaron will join us live in studio. Until then, have a good week, and we'll see you next Thursday, 4:20, right here on THC Live.